Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at this kind of pattern where you have two intersecting bodies and they make a overlapping line around the two pieces. Really easy to do in Grasshopper. Okay, so we're going to be working on this design today. This is a clutch purse handbag object, and it has this raised section and then this base rectangular portion. And we want to make the pattern be in between these two sections. So we'll start by isolating each section from each other, since we'll need two parts to figure out where the intersection is, and then when we figure out where the intersection is, we can create this kind of raised bump pattern. So let's start by separating these two pieces so we can have what we need for this workflow. So to separate the two, I'm just going to draw an outline around this pattern, and then we can use that to remove the base from the raised part, and then we can also use it to remove the raised part from the base so we can make these two separate pieces. So let's draw that line, just do a little time lapse here for that. Okay, now that we've got the curve, let's make this a surface and then we can extrude it through the piece. So we'll start by putting the curve into Grasshopper, and let's close this curve really quick. There we go. So we can make this a surface. We have a couple different ways to do that, but let's just give it a patch. I'll make it a surface, and then we can extrude it on the x-axis. And we'll just grab a slider here. No idea how big we're going to go, so we'll just make it a massive range. And then let's go back to perspective. And we can make this larger. It looks like 100 is definitely not enough. So let's increase this slider. Make that a lot larger. And right now it's only going one direction, and it would be best if this was centered. So let's grab a move, and then we'll just reverse this vector and divide it by 2. That'll send it halfway backwards, and at this point we have it centralized within the bag, so we can finalize our extrusion value. That looks like it's covering the entire width of the bag. And now that we have this part, let's cap this off. So we have there we go, looks good. And now we can start doing our Boolean operations to separate the pieces and get the two different parts that we need. So let's go. So it'll be easy to remove kind of this base rectangle and leave the pattern. But for keeping the base rectangle, that'll be a little bit different. So let's just start setting up the volume difference here to remove the base from the pattern. So I'm using Dendro here, and we'll create some settings. Give it a slider. I always start 0.01 to 1, and just start that high, just so you don't crash Grasshopper when you first plug it in. And we'll give it some other good values here. So I usually give it a 3 and a 0. That makes a really clean result with those numbers. So we'll convert the mesh to a volume, and this isn't a mesh yet. As we can see, it's a closed B-rep. So let's just modify this, and we'll convert it into a mesh with a mesh B-rep component. I'll plug that in. Now we've gone from a closed B-rep to a mesh. So we'll plug that in. So now we have a volume, and we'll need a similar volume for the bag as well. So let's import the bag as a mesh, because that is what it is in Rhino. I have that layer locked, so I'll turn that off. We'll set that mesh. And now we can plug that in here. So now that we have that, we can take our mesh and subtract the cutting shape that we just produced. So let's hide all of this. I'm also going to hide the bag itself that's in Rhino. Okay, so now we're left with this pattern here, which is pretty good. It'll visualize better if we give it a custom preview though. So let's add a color, just like a middle gray. And let's flip this to wireframe. Now I can see that a lot better. So, okay, now this is looking good. We have this pattern section. And just for the sake of things, let's mirror cut this so we have the nice pattern on both sides. This is kind of a rough back section. So let's use pufferfish here and we'll do a mirror cut mesh. We'll need to define our mirror plane, which looks like it's just going to be YZ. Plug that in. And let's mirror cut that. And I'm going to replace the custom preview here once it loads. Okay, now that we've got the nice pattern on both sides, it looks like we're getting a weird mesh thing in there, which actually shouldn't matter for this process. So let's grab the actual good pattern of the bag as well, and we might a pretty normal rectangular prism, like a box. We could probably just model it with some sub D tools and approximate it really quickly. So let's do that. Let's go to sub D, start with a box. We'll draw this box. And let's go to shaded view, and we'll just turn on the symmetrical, the reflect for sub D objects. Turn on OSnap, and then we'll draw our plane here. Let's do that. Okay, and now every operation we do will be symmetric. So let's just make sure this is centered first off, which I don't think it is. Yeah, let's just move it over a little bit. It's close enough. And let's preview our final mesh again so we have a good center. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so let's turn on some of the selection filters so we can add points, curves, and surfaces to our selection. And now we can do that bag shape we're looking at.
Yes, please.
So let's see that again. Okay, let's center this in the other direction as well. Looks pretty good. And now we can actually start sculpting this shape. So we'll get the width down. We'll get the height dialed in. Just about there. And we'll go for the width as well. We'll start with something like that, just for the top. And we can do a separate selection for the bottom here. Wait. Okay, we'll give it something like that. Let's widen the middle just a tiny bit. Maybe we'll shrink this top down. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. Just trying to get this as close as possible to what I had. We can see the red starting to come through, so it's looking like it's pretty close to what it was. And then just finally, to get these nice corners, we'll add some edge loops in here to just round off all the corners a little bit better. So let's insert a sub D edge loop and go here, move that up, and then you can see we're getting that curve a lot better. We'll just probably go about there. We'll do this for the bottom as well because we can see it's starting to neck in right there. Do it again, I'll just pull one down. That looks a little bit better for what we had. Again, remember the rest of this is covered by the actual pattern, so we don't have to worry about the bottom too much. Let's add some edge loops going to the positive and negative y-axis this time. So add an edge loop this way, and that'll push that corner out. And we'll do the same thing for the other side. About there. And now we can just move these little bits to refine that corner a little bit better. Looks pretty good. Now we can shrink this section a little bit more. Just because when we add edge loops to refine, we lose some of the smoothing overall of the shape. So it's become a bit more defined, which has thrown off our pattern a tiny bit. That looks a little bit closer. Maybe we take down just these corners as well, just a tiny bit. Yeah, it should be good. Okay, so I think that gives us our pattern pretty well. So we have this mesh. Let's bring this sub D in, just like we brought the mesh in. So sub D, set 1, set this one. Let's turn off our selection filters. I get the whole thing. Okay, so once again, we'll be using Dendro for this entire pattern creation process. So we already have some settings made. Let's just duplicate them. We'll have a whole separate Dendro section this time. But we will need a mesh to volume again. So we'll plug that in. And we have two meshes this time. We have the pattern itself, which is going to be this one. That'll be one of the meshes. And then we'll need to bring the base box that we made with sub D tools in as a mesh as well. So right now the sub D is a sub D, so we'll have to convert that to a mesh. Just like we did for the B-rep, the mesh, we'll convert the sub D to a mesh. So again, sub D mesh, it'll give us this component that'll make a mesh, and then we can bring that in as a Dendro volume. So now we have two volumes. It's looking pretty good. Let's just cut that. And now for the actual reason why we're here, the tutorial part, we'll be creating this pattern. Since we have the two meshes, we want to get the intersection between the two and figure out what that shape is. So in order to do that, now that we have these two volumes, we'll come here and we'll use an offset volume. And we'll do an offset for both of these. We'll need a slider. So we know it's pretty big. So let's just do something like this. We'll do 10 to start and just see what that looks like. Put that in the distance input. Okay, so we'll bring one of the volumes in and just see what this offset is giving us. So we'll wait for that to come back. Okay, cool. Looks like it's come back. Looks like it's a good distance. We could probably go a little bit less, but before we do that, always make sure to save your files. So now that we're saved, let's go to 8. Okay, it's a little bit better.
What?
Also, our settings are probably a little bit low just for how big this part is. So we'll bring that up a little bit. Let's edit this value. Let's put the max at 10, and I'll put the actual numerical value at 2, so we'll just double the previous value. So we've got a time of around 15 seconds for this to calculate. We'll see what it updates to in a second. Okay, so it looks like our detail hasn't really taken a hit at all, which is good. It does look like we're a little bit too wide here with this sub D because it's coming through our pattern. Yeah, on both sides. So let's turn these selection filters back on, and we'll just scale this section in a little bit. Okay, looking a little bit better. We're still impeding a little bit, so let's bring it down a little bit even more. Okay, that's looking really good. Okay, so we should be good to proceed. Let's look again at this value of 8. Probably still a little big for what we're looking for. Let's go to 6. Okay, and we'll do that for both. So we've got the base, and we'll do it for the pattern as well. And we'll see how this looks in a second here. Okay, so now we've got this distance of 6 for both. And now you'll notice we have an offset from the pattern and we have the offset from the base. And if we look at the intersection of these two, that'll give us the pattern that traces this intersection curve. So let's just grab that intersection. To see, and now we see we're getting this intersection pattern here, and it's raised off of both surfaces. Okay, so now that we have that, let's start combining things back together. So we have the initial base as a volume, we'll bring that in. We have the pattern as a volume, we'll bring that in as well. And we have this intersection as well. So we'll bring all those together. And we'll see we get this final mesh from that. As you can see, I'm just wiring everything into this volume here. Let's make sure, okay, they are on 2 different branches, which is not great because it's not actually going to combine everything. So because of that, we'll flatten here. And now we can see we have one list with 3 dendro volumes, which will give us one result out of the back here. So everything is union together, which is really good. Okay, so now that we have the pattern, let's turn off all of our things in Rhino. So now we just have this. Let's look at it in color. It's looking really good. And maybe before we throw the intersection pattern in, we'll just give a smooth to that part as well. So let's take out this wire, we'll put in this wire. Try again. And that's looking a little bit better. Let's up the smoothing. So right now we're at mean smoothing. Let's go to Gaussian smoothing. So we'll just go down to 0 for that integer. That'll select Gaussian smoothing. Yeah, it looks a little bit better there. And maybe we'll up the iterations. So right now we're at 1 iteration of smoothing. Let's just go to 2, see what happens. Yeah, I like that, but I think we also need a smoothing on everything just to round it out. Because right now the actual intersection pattern is nice, but where it meets the base and the pattern, it's a little bit harsh there. So let's just smooth everything. Preview that. Yeah, that looks better. Cool. That's a pretty good pattern. Maybe we'll raise it back up a little bit. 6 might be a little bit too small. I want to see it a little bit more prominent, so let's go to 8. Is that too much, though? Might be too much. Let's go like 6.5. Okay, yeah, a bit better there. It's looking pretty good. And the detail still looks pretty good with this volume setting. So let's do one last thing, because right now it is still a dendro volume. We'll need to convert it back to a mesh if we want to use this anywhere outside of just Grasshopper. So we'll use the exact same settings. That should give us a pretty good detail on that mesh. Yeah, it's looking good close up. Okay, sweet. Let's apply it to a couple other things just to see the final pattern, because that's about it for creating that pattern today. Let's just start throwing some sub D shapes at it and see what happens. So this is the whole process right here. So we'll just duplicate this down here, and we'll grab 2 new sub Ds and just start playing. So it's got one there. This has the other one. Okay, sweet. So let's get some sub Ds and let's do like a box here, and we'll also do a sphere. See what these two look like. And let's turn off the selection filters so let's select the whole thing. So now we have a nice cube. Let's make this bigger overall. And we'll interface that with the sphere here. Okay, box will be this first one, and the sphere will be the second one. Right. Okay, and let's turn off the objects in Rhino and preview on the final results. Okay, cool. So now we can play a little bit more just because we have 2 kind of abstract shapes. So let's up this so everything runs a lot quicker. And let's up this a lot. And we'll do 20 on that. Yeah, cool. And we'll up this slider as well. Let's go 30 here. Sweet. Okay, let's change this to Gaussian as well. Yeah, that gives a good transition between the two. And we'll throw some iterations on this final smoothing as well, just to smooth everything together. Super high, it kind of has a good curve in between. That's not as harsh, it's just unioning two shapes together. Yeah, like that's a good stretchiness to it, which could be an aesthetic you're going for. Let's bring this back down so we can actually see it to 2. Yeah, that's nice. And then, what if, let's bring these shapes back. Okay, what if we had a bunch of spheres? So let's do a couple more. Okay, sweet. So now that we have 4, let's just put these all together. Okay, so let's start by actually putting all of these spheres together. So we can just do that with a join mesh. So now these are all a single mesh, because right here with the intersection we're getting a bad result just because we have 4 separate volumes here compared to this one for the box. So if we have them all together as a single mesh, that should solve that, because then it'll give us only one volume for all the spheres. So one volume there, do the intersection, get a much better result. Okay, so let's turn off this, and yeah, now we can see the intersections a lot better here. These 3 different ones, 4 different ones. Cool. So yeah, I mean, we could even populate the geometry of this with a bunch of little spheres. So yeah, let's do that. So we've got some points, we've got spheres. Let's give it a random radius value. So we'll construct this domain up. So between what number and what number? Go to 100 to make it big. Okay, so right now it's between 1 and 1, but if we do a random between 1 and something bigger. Cool, and now we just need to know how many points we have. So, I mean, by default, this comes in at 100, but let's make this a little bit more smart and actually measure that list length and then get a certain number. Okay, now we just have a bunch of spheres at all random parts, and we have all those as meshes because we're using this mesh sphere component. And let's just plug that into the mesh join and swap out the other spheres we have and see what happens with this. Cool. Let's make these even bigger. Nice. And let's bring this number down. Cool. I mean, that's pretty random, pretty nice. One thing we can even do on top of this, let's make these spheres a little bit higher resolution first, because I can see some facets on this bigger one. Okay, it looks a lot better. One thing we can do to spruce this up even a bit more is, let's go through this workflow again. So we have the offsets there, we'll smooth them down, then we combine everything together. So before we do this part, let's take this and let's go back to Dendro and let's subtract out the original spheres. So if we do that, actually, before that, okay. So let's take that and let's take this initial base. We'll combine those together. Oh, sorry, not this offset. We'll take this initial cube. Yeah, there we go. And we'll subtract out the initial spheres. Okay, now we have this cool base with the offset pattern, but without the initial spheres on it. So if we were to, and we're kind of branching off here with the workflow to a different goal. But if we smooth those, let's preview that. Just turn off this one. It's a kind of different workflow there. Okay, so I mean, we're starting off with a kind of cool erosion pattern with these spheres just eating away at the base object, kind of like an apple. But we can also preview at the same time. Let's do a slightly different color. We can preview the initial spheres, which I believe are these meshes. Okay, cool. So now we can see them together, and we can see how they're kind of popping through, popping out, leaving little chunks of the intersection pattern. And we have this really nice dichotomy of the spheres like chewing into this mesh. So kind of nice for that pattern as well. And let's just swap it back to these spheres and see what happens. Yeah, cool. So pretty nice workflow. Not too complicated as far as some things I do go. So hopefully you learned something, and hopefully this was informative and you can use it in some of your projects. And check back next time for another wild Grasshopper workflow. In the meantime, if you want to download this script instead of having to build it yourself, I've got the files over on Patreon. So this video and all the Rhino and Grasshopper files I use for it are going to be there as well. So you can just open that up and start using it instantly. So if that's interesting to you, go check it out there. Links are in the description. But other than that, I'll see you next time. Bye.